Hey there, my fellow cult reachers and anti-religionists. This is Jason with People of the Free Gift Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about Charles Manson in light of his recent passing and some of the impact that he had on the world, and specifically diving into some of those key areas that identify and associate somebody with being in a cult or a cult leader. And today we're going to be talking about the connection to Charles Manson and mind control. Now, interestingly enough, I found an article on conspiracytruths.co.uk called LSD and Charles Manson, the Social Experiment. And so I thought I'd kind of respond a little bit to the article without getting into all of it, because quite honestly, I thought some of it was just quite ridiculous. But let's go ahead and get into some of the things that he said. Now, if you want to be entered into a drawing to win a gift card of your choice for $20, here's how you do it. You click on the subscribe button, and in your comments, you're going to say what your Facebook name is. And the reason is because you're also going to need to like my pages on Facebook. You can either like the People of the Free Gift page if you're into the apologetics and cults videos we do, or you can like the Star Wars and philosophy page if you enjoy videos that we do related to Star Wars and philosophy. That's all you have to do. Surprisingly, he was making an argument that Charles Manson was the victim of mind control, specifically through the use of LSD. And LSD being a product, at least in this person's argument, of something that the military had implemented, and it is the article's belief that the military implemented it to end the social experiment in mind control manipulation of the 60s and the free love and hippie era, and to end that in introducing into the LSD and Charles Manson era. And so it makes the case that the celebrity world is literally drowning in mind control victims. In fact, this definition of celebrity should be as follows, according to the article: celebrity, an individual programmed by the elite to program the masses. As John Lennon once said, we're more popular than Jesus now. And celebrities, in many ways, you could argue that they are the new form of religion. And according to the article, they are taking the place of the manipulation that religion has held on the masses for a very, very long time. And so celebrities are basically being used, according to this article, to manipulate the masses into the political agendas that the those in control want them to. So, in reference to celebrities, we mimic their hair, their makeup, their fashion. We obsess about their diet, their bodies, their sex life, their routines. We flock in huge crowds just to get a glimpse of them walk the red carpet. And so, in relation to this, Charles Manson was, in a way, caught up in this scene and then used by it to manipulate and make a change, a cultural change, according to the article. Now, I'm going to get into my feelings about the article in a moment, but never before has human behavior been so predictable, not just because of the advances in studies and science, but mainly because now the intelligence agencies have access to your Facebook, your email, your browser history, your webcam, your mobile phone camera, your photos, your calls, your texts, etc. Now, this is where conspiracytruths.co.uk is an appropriate name for this site, because it's a little bit paranoid in its descriptions and the connections between these things. Yes, we all know that when we're signing up in the terms and conditions on a lot of these different social media things or smartphones, that in that it does give permission for them to be using our cameras and all of these things. And we all see it show up whenever we're talking about things or we're interested in things. Then all of a sudden we'll go on Facebook and they'll show us that very thing that we've been interested in. And so it's very spooky in one way, but in the same way, they are monitoring our behavior mostly to try and sell us stuff. And I don't know that that's really that creepy, as much as it is almost useful, because you don't have to put a whole lot of effort into buying the things that you want. And culture over time gets shifted towards what people want to buy. And that's the way the marketplace has always worked. And that's the way America works. Just we maybe didn't really acknowledge that. But is the government really interested in what I am doing? That is the kind of thought pattern that I think is dangerous and leads people down the roads that ultimately make them like Charles Manson. And we'll get more into that in a second here. And Lenin said in an interview published in January 1981, "We must always remember to thank the CIA and the Army for LSD. That's what people forget. They invented LSD to control people, and what they did was give us freedom." Now, that's the perspective of John Lennon. And a lot of us, over 50 years later, well, not 50 years since the article, but 50 years since the popularity of LSD, really, um, we see the fallacy in that statement. That LSD is not to give us freedom. There's a lot of people who are still caught up in drugs, but we wouldn't call an addiction to drugs freedom. But that's the way they kind of thought of it in those days. But he also talks about LSD was intended to try and control people. And MK Ultra was an extensive testing and experimentation program which included covert drug tests on unwitting citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans and foreign. And several of these tests involved the administration of LSD to unwitting subjects in social situations. In 1953, the CIA began a research program called Project MK Ultra. MK standing for mind control. Now, control doesn't usually start with a K unless you're using the German spelling of it, tipping the hat to the Nazi scientists who began the work years earlier. Now, the truth is, I couldn't tell you whether or not all of this is true or whether it's just all sort of manipulative and paranoia that is kind of created by websites like this, conspiracy sites. But they claim the sole purpose of the MK Ultra was the behavioral modification or behavioral engineering of human beings in order to be able to control and enslave them. Through these mind control techniques, subjects are first depatterned by manipulating their individual mental states and altering their brain functions through electroconvulsion therapy, the administration of drugs, hypnosis, sensory and sleep deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and various other forms of torture. As a result, and as coping mechanism to deal with extreme trauma, the victims' brains would develop multiple personality disorder, or more colloquially, dissociative identity disorder, which is when different dissociative parts of a single brain view themselves as separate persons. MK Ultra victims would be subject to trauma after trauma to completely break down their personality and to recondition their minds. Now, I do need to make a point here. Mind control is different than brainwashing. Some of the things that he described there, if this was indeed true, it would be brainwashing, not mind control. When the person knows that something is being done to them, that is brainwashing. It's when they use torture or other known devices that make the condition so extreme that the person just mentally goes into a state where they accept the new reality and make that, it becomes a part of them. And so, like it describes, they have multiple personality disorder and things of that nature. And so I just wanted to clarify that. Celebrities bring a more subtle form of mind control, says the article, comes into play in the form of slow brainwashing that takes generations. Usually the subjects are more or less unaware that any of this is happening to them. This is achieved by playing on the subconscious part of the brain using propaganda, mass media, and pop culture. This is where we come in, all starstruck, mimicking and idolizing our celebrity heroes like they are gods. Now, here's the interesting thing. This is where I could see that Charles Manson does start to come into play in the picture. Is that we're going to get into a minute how Charles Manson was an aspiring artist wanting to be like one of his good friends who was one of the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson, and was never recognized as an artist that any label wanted to pick up. And that did lead to his disillusionment. And he was involved in LSD and a lot of drugs. And so those things did alter his mind. And so then you could see where that did come into play in his life. So the introduction of LSD to society during the 50s and 60s was a social experiment to study human behavioral modification, as set out in CIA mind control project Mkultra. As Lenin correctly stated, LSD was created by the intelligence agency to control people, and it was, and still is today, the army and the government who put these drugs on the street. But enforcing stricter laws and banning drugs alone was not enough. A catalyst was needed to change people's perception. And in the opinion of the article writer, Charles Manson was used to great effect to bring about an end to the People's Revolution. In late 1969, the Manson family was the subject of sensational news reports and eventually found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. They were the murders that ended the 1960s, the decade of love, in a bloodbath that shocked the world. The most famous victim was actress Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate's body was left in the ritualistic position of the hangman tarot card 12, with rope around her neck. Tate's blood was also used to write the word pig on the wall. The peace and love of the 60s became Charles Manson and LSD of the 70s. Another spooky coincidence in Lennon's 1974 Rolling Stone interview, where he places 3 of the Beatles at 10,500 Cielo Drive. And then, we just decided to take LSD again in California. We were on tour in one of those houses, like Doris Day's house or wherever it was we used to stay. And the 3 of us took it, Ringo, George, and I, and a couple of the birds, Crosby and the other guy, who used to be the leader, McGinn. I think they came around, I'm not sure, on a few trips. 10,500 Cielo Drive was, of course, the location of the first night of the Manson family murders. At the time, the house at 10,500 Cielo Drive was owned by Doris Day. Day's son was Terry Melker, who worked with the Beatles and was also the man who Charles Manson had been trying to impress with his music after becoming acquainted through their mutual friend, Beach Boy Brian Wilson. In case you were not familiar with the Charles Manson case in a nutshell, here is what the prosecutors and media say about him. He was a hippie cult leader. He believed in something he called Helter Skelter, named after the Beatles song of the same name. This involved a race war between blacks and whites. It is said Manson believed that blacks would win the war, but would lack the intelligence to rule themselves. So after hiding out in the desert with his followers during Helter Skelter, Manson could emerge and become the leader of the New World. He held a great deal of resentment toward his record producer, Terry Melker, whom he met at 10,050 Cielo Drive prior to Polanski and Tate moving in. The house was actually owned by Melker's mother, none other than Doris Day. Melker famously worked with the Beatles, the Byrds, and the Beach Boys, but a record deal with Manson never happened, and this was the alleged motive of Manson's instructions to kill. He held a strange hypnotic hold over his followers and brainwashed them into committing the murders to escalate helter skelter. Now, again, he's confusing brainwashing with mind control because I do believe that mind control was more along the lines of what Charles Manson practiced. It's the same mind control that is used by totalitarian governments. It's the same mind control that is used by cult leaders, almost every single one of them, or the organizations. The key to mind control is that the person who's implementing it doesn't have to be aware that they're doing it, and the person who it's being done to doesn't have to be known that it's being done to. So it can perpetuate itself organizationally over generations without anybody ever knowing that it's going on. And so they will swear up and down that they are not brainwashing their people or using manipulative tactics, while all along they are using well-known behavior control, emotional control, thought control, information control. I said those out of order. It's usually known as the BITE model, BITE model. And Charles Manson definitely practiced that kind of mind control. Rolling Stone magazine called him the most dangerous man alive. It is largely unspoken that Manson himself has never actually committed murder, but the fact remains that he has not been convicted for being directly responsible, but for conspiracy to murder. And that just goes to show the control that he did have on these people, the mind control that he did have on these people, to be able to convince other people to do something that you personally are not going to be involved in. That's powerful stuff. Manson clearly has personality disorders, and this is a classic example of someone who's undergone this sort of mind control program. So he's making the case that Manson's awkward social practices were because he was a victim personally of mind control. Patricia Krenwinkel, one of the Manson family members, said it took her 5 years to become fully conscious again after the time spent with the family. You know, it's interesting. They say that on average, from the first time a doubt enters the mind of somebody that's in a cult to the time in which they actually are able to leave the cult, it is about 5 years. What a coincidence. You will find that he was not a hippie, nor was he a cult leader. I would disagree with that part of the article. Absolutely disagree with that statement. Manson absolutely fits the description of a cult leader. And being a rejected, abused child of the state who grew up in boys' homes and prisons, having spent half his life behind bars before being convicted of the Tate LaBianca murders, I also suspect he did not possess the power to brainwash and control people's actions to the extent that prosecutor Vincent Buglioso makes claim in his book. Again, absolutely nonsense. A person who, especially if you believe somebody has undergone mind control, they are absolutely able to and almost predisposed to passing on that mind control practice to those that are following them, especially if they aspire for control and power themselves. And Manson couldn't get it in music, and so he went on to the influence that he had with those that were seeking meaning and value in their life, and using that to get revenge of his own. Manson himself was not allowed to call his key witnesses to the stand in his defense. Despite how it's portrayed in the books and in the films, Manson was never given his right to a fair trial. Even President Nixon famously declared Manson guilty in an American paper even before the jury had heard the case and made their own decision. And here's 3 quotes from Manson taken from the fascinating book, Manson in His Own Words. And so this is where the article is kind of making the case that Manson, kind of sympathizing with Manson. Manson was a victim. Manson was a victim of the state. Manson was used against his control. Manson wasn't guilty of actual murder himself. Manson was framed, and even the President of the United States declared him guilty. He didn't get a fair trial. And yeah, at the same time, the article writer is trying to say, I don't agree with Manson. I'm not on his side, but it's kind of hard to see how he's not making a case that Charles Manson himself is not a dangerous person, but rather a victim of those who are dangerous. It goes on, in the 50s, to score a lid of grass. This was a quote of Manson. To score a lid of grass, you had to make a phone call or two and use a lot of discretion about who you dealt with. As for making it with a broad, a guy might wine and dine her for several times before even being able to kiss her a girl's goodnight. Now people were like the music, very fast, and all seemed willing. Pretty little girls were running around every place with no panties or bras and asking for love. Okay, parental discretion advised at this point. Just to throw that out there. Grass and hallucinatory drugs were being handed to you on the streets. It was a different world than I had ever been in, and one that I believed was too good to be true. It was a convict's dream, and after being locked up for 7 solid years, I didn't run from it. I joined it and the generation that lived it. I stayed in this is another quote. I stayed in the Haight-Ashbury district for some time. Overall, the people in the district were like one big family. As a true family is bonded by heredity, those in the Haight were bonded by their countercultural lifestyles and resentment of government and society. It was a place where everyone did his own thing and didn't object to the other guy doing his. The occult was practiced almost as openly as socially accepted religions. A Catholic or a Protestant would enter the Haight and possibly leave as a Buddhist or an atheist. Devil worship, witchcraft, sex orgies, and perversion were everyday occurrences. A group of people might shed a tear one day over the slight injury of an animal when the night before they had participated in some weird bloodletting ritual. I've heard that Haight-Ashbury's reputation was created by flower children who advocated love and peace. There were a few of those still in the district, but as a whole, that image was on the decline long before Charles Manson appeared on the scene. Other than love and hallucinogenic drugs, I did not participate in mind trips or rituals, nor did I ever get involved in all the protests concerning the Vietnam War. When approached to march or stand in front of some building and protest, I'd say half seriously, "What war? I've been locked up for 7 years. Is there a war going on?" They say I became convinced the Beatles' White Album, with its songs of Piggies, Revolution Number 9, and Helter Skelter, held special messages for me and my circle, that I interpreted them as signals to create an uprising between the races and began programming everyone to prepare themselves for what was going to come down. I don't deny disappointment at not reaching my goals as a musician, nor do I deny being impressed by the White Album. But I gotta say, those kids, the family members, were expressing their own ideas more than what was going through my mind. Those kids were the Beatles generation. I had at least 10 years on most of them. I envied any successful musician and appreciated any best-selling album, but like most people, the music I felt close to was music I had heard when I was young. Sinatra, Crosby, Como, and people that era meant more to me than the Beatles, Beach Boys, or any of the prominent groups in the 60s. The lyrics I wrote and the music I put to those lyrics identify me as not being at all that wrapped up in the Beatles. Vincent Buglioso emphasizes the impact of the Manson murders on society. The mantra of the era was peace, love, and sharing. Prior to the Manson case, people just didn't identify hippies with violence. Then the Manson family comes along, looking like hippies, but being mass murderers, and that shocked America. How could this be? Buglioso later told the Observer paper in 2009 the Manson murders sounded the death knell for hippies and all they symbolically represented. They closed an era. The 60s, the decade of love, ended on that night on August 9th, 1969. The plan from the start was to end the hippie era. The introduction of LSD to society during the 50s and 60s was a social experiment to study human behavioral modification. Charles Manson was just another catalyst, like the LSD, used to spark a reaction and change the way people behaved. Now, I have to say that there's a lot in that article that's probably true. But to the extent that Charles Manson had mind control practiced on him, the extent that that was the cause of him, I think the evidence is really right in front of your face. When it comes to Manson, he did have a disturbing childhood. He did sympathize, it seems, at least in part, with struggles between races. He did suffer disillusionment over a failed music career, while all of his friends around him were making it successful. And it does seem that in some way there was a connection between that disillusionment and the revenge that he took out on society. So Charles Manson had a great impact on society, regardless of what the causes were. whether it was the drugs, whether it was his own ambitions, whether it was government control. Charles Manson is a man that was very dangerous, a typical, stereotypical cult leader. And now he has passed on.
Now, fulfill your destiny.
I want to encourage you, if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and share this video with others and this channel with others. It helps every time you do that. It actually helps the channel out financially, and it helps us to grow and get in front of others.